This is the first chapter of my novel Looking for Alaska. It's called 136 Days Before. The week before I left my family and Florida and the rest of my minor life to go to boarding school in Alabama, my mother insisted on throwing me a going-away party. To say that I had low expectations for this party would be to understate the matter dramatically. Although I was more or less forced to invite all of my school friends, the ragtag bunch of drama people and English geeks I sat with by social necessity in the cavernous cafeteria of my public school, I knew they wouldn't come. But still, my mom persevered, awash in the delusion that I had kept my popularity secret from her all these years. She cooked a small mountain of artichoke dip, she festooned our living room in blue and yellow streamers, the colors of my new school, and she bought 24 champagne poppers. And when that final Friday came, when my packing was mostly done, she sat with my dad and me on the living room couch at 4:56 p.m. and patiently awaited the arrival of the Goodbye to Miles cavalry.
This guy went to a boarding school in Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
like some others of us do.
Yes. No, my story is very similar to his in some ways. I mean, we both grew up in Florida. We both went to a boarding school in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
The physical place of the boarding school is very similar in the book as to my real school. Very similar, so similar that you could almost map the place using the book if you wanted to. But I still don't think the story is that autobiographical. I think that the main character, Miles, is very different than I was in high school. I was in some ways much more like Alaska. I think much reckless and angry, confused, very high highs, very low lows, and so.
Tell us about Alaska, who she is.
Oh yeah, when Miles gets to boarding school, he meets this young woman named Alaska, who's beautiful and very funny and razor sharp and troubled, and he immediately is enthralled with her. And then sort of the story of their coming together and then falling apart.
Mm-hmm. I think every reader will love her, but what happens to her?
Well, we lose her, and that's
we lose her.
Yes, that's how I would say it, I guess. Yeah, and I wanted to write the book in a way that you have half the book to love her and to care about her and to come to feel both affection for her and also a protectiveness toward her, a desire to keep her from her troubles, and because I wanted there to be that aching of loss. I wanted there to be some of that feeling of loss, because so often in novels, when characters die, it's very near the end or very near the beginning, and so you don't have time to experience both the love and also the grief. That cavalry, needless to say, did not arrive, and so we sat, and I stared at the blank TV and wanted to turn it on but knew that I shouldn't, and I could feel them both looking at me, waiting for me to burst into tears or something, as if I hadn't known all along that it would go precisely like this. But I had known. They were the one who needed pity, not me. I wasn't disappointed. My expectations had been met. "Is this why you want to leave, Colin?" my mom asked. I mulled it over for a moment, careful not to look at her. No, I said. "Well, why then?" she asked. "Hold on," I said. I went into my dad's study and found the biography of Francois Rabelais. I liked reading biographies of writers, even if, as is the case with Monsieur Rabelais, I'd never read any of their actual writing. I flipped to the back and found the highlighted quote. I returned to the living room and said, "So this guy, Francois Rabelais, he was this poet, right? And his last words were, 'I go to seek a great perhaps.' That's why I'm going, so I don't have to wait until I die to seek a great perhaps." And that quieted them. I was after a great perhaps, and they knew as well as I did that I wasn't going to find it at home or at my school or anywhere in my entire home state. All right. I sat back down on the couch. I sat back down on the couch between my mom and my dad put his arm around me, and we stayed there like that, quiet on the couch together, for a long time, until it seemed okay to turn on the TV. And then we ate artichoke dip for dinner, and we watched the History Channel, and as going away parties go, it certainly could have been worse. That's the first chapter.
Why did you want to write about loss?
Well, I worked at a children's hospital for about 6 months before I started writing Looking for Alaska, and I think that was where the ideas about the book started to come to me, and I wanted to write. I think partly because I felt like I was having a very difficult time reconciling the injustice of suffering to the world as I wanted it to be. There's a great German word that I learned quite recently, Weltschmerz, the depression that one feels when the world as it ought to be does not line up with the world as it is. And I think I was feeling quite a lot of Weltschmerz. And I think I started Looking for Alaska in some ways to try to understand how such things could happen and whether or not there is any kind of forgiveness or grace or whatever to be found in that.
Yeah, you were a chaplain at the
Right.
children's hospital.
Yeah, I worked as a chaplain there, and then I was enrolled in divinity school to become a minister, but I dropped out right after working as a chaplain. I mean, I loved the work, and I cared very deeply about it, and I felt like it was important work, and I was very interested in religion and continued to be very interested in religion, but at the end of it, I felt like I just couldn't do it. It was too hard. I really admire people who do that or work as social workers in children's hospitals particularly, but it's extraordinarily painful work, and I honestly don't know how you can continue to do it for very long. It's very hard.
To watch children die for a living.
Yes. Yeah. No, it is. That's how it felt sometimes. Like I was, like that's all I did was sort of bear witness to the death of children. It was very, very difficult. They always say that I should read from the first third of my book whenever my publisher talks to me about reading, but I'm going to read from page 228 instead. This is the part of the book where Colin Singleton, the child prodigy, has finally gotten up his guts enough to tell the story of the 19 Catherines who have dumped him. It's called The Beginning and the Middle and the End. And it's 19 Catherines and in 19 sentences. So I might read a little quickly because that's how it's coming out of him. Catherine the First was the daughter of my tutor, Crazy Keith, and she asked me to be her boyfriend one night at my house, and I said yes, and then about 2 minutes later she dumped me, which seemed funny at the time, but now, in retrospect, it's possible that those 2 minutes were among the most significant time periods of my life. Catherine II was a slightly pudgy 8-year-old from school, and she showed up at my house one day and said there was a dead rat in the alley, and being 8, I ran outside to see the dead rat, but instead I found only her best friend Amy, and Amy said, "Catherine likes you and will you be her boyfriend?" And I said, yes. And then 8 days later, Amy showed up at my door to say that Catherine did not like me anymore and wouldn't be going with me from there on out.
Yeah, you were reading about the great perhaps.
Yeah.
Great maybe. All your chief characters are looking for a kind of sense in their lives.
Yeah, I think in both of my books, all of the characters really, not even not just the main characters, but all of the characters are looking for sense and also meaning, for some idea of what really matters and what really matters about them, if anything. And I think that's a very important part of adolescence, but it's also a very important part of adulthood, as I'm starting to find out, that it's not something that happens to you once. You do, when you're an adolescent, for the first time have to grapple with whether your existence has meaning, and if so, what the meaning is, but that's something that I think you have to return to again and again and again as an adult as well. So.
And this search goes with a lot of bullshitting.
Yeah.
And humor.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like funny books, and I like people sitting around and bullshitting. I mean, I think I think a lot of that comes from when I was in high school. When I was in high school, my two goals in life were to make my friends laugh and to make girls like me. And so all that I really remember from high school is sitting in a room with my friends and trying to make them laugh and them trying to make me laugh. And then if I wasn't sitting in a room with my friends, I was trying to make a girl like me. And I think my books reflect that in some ways. So, you know, they're always interested in romantic relationships, but also interested in friendships between peers and bullshitting and, you know, fast back and forth dialogue. Because also I think I still picture those conversations in my head. I still imagine having those conversations even if I don't have them as much now.
And they're reading books about writers they don't read.
Yeah.
Biography of a writer you never read any books of?
Biography of Rabelais. He reads I think he reads a biography of Tolstoy in Looking for Alaska, but he's never read any Tolstoy. And he reads Edna St. Vincent Millay's biography, but he's never read any poetry. He hates poetry. I wasn't like that. I read biographies of writers, but I also read a lot of their writing. But I liked the idea of this kid who finds the people interesting, but does not find literature particularly interesting. Catherine III was a perfectly charming little brunette whom I met my first summer at Smart Kids Summer Camp, which would, in time, come to be the place for child prodigies to pick up chicks. And as I recall, she dumped me one morning on the archery course after a math prodigy named Jerome ran in front of her bow and fell to the ground, claiming he'd been shot by Cupid's arrow. Catherine IV was a mousy redhead with red plastic-rimmed glasses whom I met in Suzuki violin lessons, and she played beautifully and I played hardly at all because I could never be bothered to practice. And so she dumped me for a piano prodigy named Robert Vaughn, who ended up playing a solo concert at Carnegie Hall when he was 11, so I guess she made the right call there. In 5th grade, I went out with Catherine V, widely reputed to be the nastiest girl in school because she always seemed to be the one who started the lice outbreaks. And she kissed me on the lips out of nowhere during recess one day while I was trying to read Huck Finn in the sandbox, and that was my first kiss, and then later that day she dumped me because boys were gross.
And famous last words.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted...
Yeah, all over the book.
Yeah, that really came out in revision, but it is to me almost the defining thing about the book that I like the most, and as I remember it now. So I love famous last words. I always have. I've always been fascinated by what people say when they're dying or just before they're dying, or alternately what people say they said, because so often they're untrue. But I've always been interested in it, so it was fun to put it in the book. But you know, it also has some resonance, I think, because this is a guy who's really trying to come to terms with the fact that we don't always have last words or discernible last words, and so so I thought that would be interesting.
In your second book, it's not last words; it's anagrams.
Yeah, right. Well,
someone about your fascination for anagrams.
My editor asked me recently if she thought that I was going to run out of quirky obsessions anytime soon, because if so, I might have to abandon my literary career. But yeah, the new book, An Abundance of Catherines, has a lot of anagrams in it. I'm the book is about a child prodigy named Colin, and he is very good at anagrams. I unfortunately am not, but I like them quite a lot. But I don't have a talent for it, so it was very slow, laborious process. I was speaking with my Dutch translator last night, and she told me that she would get out a Scrabble board and put all of the letters from the thing that she was trying to anagram on the Scrabble board and play with it while she ate lunch, and that's how she did it. And I wish I had known about this idea, because I did it with a pen and paper, and it's very slow. So, but it was fun.
And on the internet, of course.
Yeah, I mean, the internet has things that help you, but they don't. They don't know what's funny. Like, the computer doesn't know a good joke, and they don't know which words are interesting. So you know, they'll return 10,000 results, and there will be 2 that are funny. So
for Britney Spears, for instance.
Presbyterians. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's so unlikely, because I mean, the fact that Britney Spears anagrams to Presbyterians strikes me as funny, partly because it's a very unusual spelling of Britney that her parents chose. And it's so unusual that one has to wonder whether or not they knew that Britney Spears would anagram to Presbyterians. But then you see interviews with Britney Spears' parents, and you think it's very unlikely that they thought that through. I like the idea that they did, but I think in all likelihood they did not. Then after a 6-month dry spell, I met Catherine VI during my 3rd year at Smart Kids Summer Camp, and we went together for a record 17 days, and she was excellent at both pottery and pull-ups, 2 fields of endeavor at which I have never excelled, and although between the 2 of us we could have made this unstoppable force of intelligence and upper body strength and coffee mug making, she dumped me anyway. And then came middle school, and the severe unpopularity commenced in earnest. But the nice thing about being on the near end of the cool curve is that periodically people take pity on you, such as 6th grade's Catherine the Kind, a sweetheart who wore a frequently snapped training bra, and who eventually broke up with me not because she realized I was hurting what minuscule social standing she had, but because she felt that our month-long relationship had hurt my academic pursuits.
And the anagrams, a strange guy who was a child prodigy and speaks lots of languages fluently.
Yes.
I immediately thought of Holden Caulfield.
Yeah.
J.D. Salinger.
Well, I think when you write, anytime you write about smart teenagers, you're very much in the shadow of J.D. Salinger, I think. I think that, and I also think that, I mean, at one point late in the book, actually, Colin is talking about one of the Catherines who has dumped him and says she liked me because she said that I was like Holden Caulfield, probably because we're both self-absorbed losers. And I think that they are both, in a way, self-absorbed losers, but also very bright and also, you know, kind of lovable in a way. And so, yeah, I do think I was definitely aware of the fact that when you write about bright teenagers, particularly very bright teenagers, you're always sort of under the shadow of the mountain of Salinger. I mean, every serious coming-of-age novelist is, but, and also he wrote a novella, a short story, depending on how you define it, I guess, called Seymour, An Introduction, which is about an extraordinarily bright young person. And so I do think the Glass family, generally, all of the Glass family stuff that Salinger wrote that we've seen so far, he may have written more that he has chosen not to publish, but all of that defines literature about smart teenagers. And I realized that I wasn't going to be able to play in his league, but I wanted to play with it some, and sort of acknowledge my awareness of it.
You like to play with lots of things.
Yeah, I do. I like playful. I like to be playful with language, and I think that I think books should be fun as well as serious and as smart and good as possible. But I don't think that you should sacrifice the fun because you know, we are in a very competitive market. Books are not the only way for people to entertain themselves these days, and so I like the idea very much that that books can compete partly by being fun and interesting and doing things that movies can't do and that the internet can't do. Catherine VIII wasn't quite so sweet, and maybe I should have known it since her name, Catherine Barker, anagrams into Heartbreaker Inc., like she's some veritable business mogul of breaking up. But anyway, she asked me out on a date, and then I said yes. And then she called me a freak and said that I didn't have any pubes and that she would never seriously go out with me. All of which, to be fair, was true. Catherine IX was in 6th grade when I was in 7th, and she was by far the best-looking Catherine to date, with her cute chin and her dimples in her cheeks and her skin always tan, and she thought that dating an older guy might be good for her social status, but she was wrong. Catherine X, and yes, by then I had certainly realized that this was an awfully odd statistical anomaly, was a Smart Kids Summer Camp conquer, and I won her heart by, you guessed it, running in front of her beau on the archery course and claiming I'd been shot by Cupid's arrow. Catherine XI wasn't so much a dating thing as a going to the movies once and holding hands and then me calling her and her mom saying that she wasn't home and then her never calling me back thing, but I would argue that it counts because of the hand-holding and also because she called me a genius. At the start of the second semester of ninth grade, this new girl showed up from school, and she was as rich as they come. Sorry. At the start of the second semester of ninth grade, a new girl showed up from school, and she was from New York. I messed up again. At the start of the second semester of ninth grade, a new girl showed up from New York, and she was as rich as they come, but she hated being rich, and she loved The Catcher in the Rye, and she said that I reminded her of Holden Caulfield, presumably because we're both self-absorbed losers, and she liked me because I knew a lot of languages and had read a lot of books, but then she broke up with me because she wanted a boyfriend who didn't spend so much time reading and learning languages.
So you read a story about a guy who gets dumped by 19 consecutive Catherines.
Yes. Yes. Well, I wanted to, yeah, that's very playful and sort of absurdist. I mean, I wanted it to be a number that was sort of impossibly high. I remember when I first talked about the idea, my British editor said, well, don't you think it would be more realistic if it was 9 Catherines? And I said, I think you're rather missing the point. I don't think it would be realistic at all if it was 9 Catherines. Yeah. I think it would still be absolutely impossible. Although someone did figure out that there are more than 19 Catherines living in Chicago, but in his age group, there are about 200. So it's perfectly possible if he devoted his life to the pursuit of Catherines and if they all at least briefly liked him. But yeah, he's been dumped by 19 girls named Catherine, and I wanted it to be an impossibly big number because he is a kid who has really devoted his life to trying to be special and quirky and unique. And so this is a way of being special and quirky and unique, albeit not a fun way.
Not a fun way, no.
No, yeah, no. Getting dumped is not recommended.
And he even has a formula that predicts when and how someone is going to be dumped.
Right. Yeah. In the he develops this mathematical formula that if the girl dumps the boy, it looks like this, and if the boy dumps the girl, it looks like this, and so all of his relationships look like this. Yeah, I wanted. I like this idea that math can tell the story in a way. You know, math can tell a visual story. And math can be a kind of narrative, but I also wanted him to have this sort of massively nerdy way of trying to process his getting dumped that is not going to help him not get dumped, that is like totally counterproductive.
He tries to understand the world in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he thinks he can understand the world that way, and it seems like it might work, but it doesn't.
Does it make you a nerd to do just that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Colin's a nerd. I think Miles from Looking for Alaska is a nerd. I think I'm a nerd. I like writing about nerds. I believe very strongly that we should celebrate nerds. So many books now, particularly books that teenagers read or that are about teen characters, celebrate being stupid and being vapid and being cool and wearing the right shoes, and I'm completely disinterested in that, and I think that's way off the mark. And what I like to celebrate and what I like about people is when they're smart and interesting, and so I like to celebrate intellectualism and this notion that there are books that you read for fun and then books that you read to feel smart. I just don't believe it. I believe that books that you read to feel smart, because that presumes that being smart isn't fun. And I think being smart is quite fun, significantly more fun than owning the correct pair of shoes. I think that being smart is, you know, to whatever small extent I'm smart, it's the most fun thing going on in my life. Like I think that this is incredibly cheesy to say, and any teenager would wince at the sound of it. But I think that learning should be fun. I think that learning is fun. Having knowledge is fun. By then I had met Hassan, and for about 10 years I'd had this obsessive crush on this brunette with blue eyes from school, who I'd always called Catherine the Best, and Hassan played like Cyrano and told me exactly how to woo her, but he didn't tell me exactly how not to get dumped by her, and she dumped me because, and I am quoting directly here, I was both too smart and too dumb for her, which marked the beginning of Catherine's having ridiculous, idiotic, and frequently oxymoronic reasons for breaking up with me. A pattern that continued with Catherine XIV, who I met that spring when she came up to me at a coffee shop and asked me if I was reading Camus, which I was, so I said I was, and then she asked me if I had ever read Kierkegaard, which I said I had because I had, and then by the time we left the coffee shop, we were holding hands, and she liked to take me for walks on the lakeshore, where we'd watch the waves crash against the rocks on the shoreline, and she said that there was only one metaphor, and that the metaphor was water beating against the rocks, because, she said, both the water and the rocks end up worse off in the bargain. And then when she dumped me in the same coffee shop 3 months later, she said that she was the water and I was the rocks, and we were just going to keep going at each other until there was nothing left of either of us. And when I pointed out that actually water doesn't suffer any negative effects whatsoever from slowly eroding rocks on the lakeshore, she allowed as to how that was true, but dumped me anyway. And then that summer at camp, I met Catherine XV, who had that kind of puppy dog face with big brown eyes and drooping eyelids that just sort of made you want to take care of her, only she didn't want me to take care of her because she was a very empowered feminist who liked me because she thought I was the great mind of my generation. But then she decided that I would never be, and again I'm quoting here, an artist, which was apparently cause for dismissal, even though I've never claimed to be an artist, and in fact, if you've listened closely, you've already heard me freely admit that I suck at pottery.
And are you going to keep writing about adolescents, people coming of age?
I think so. I mean, I don't really find... I was thinking about this this week that I've been in Holland. I was thinking that I don't seem to find adults interesting as for literary characters. I like to read about books that feature adults, but I don't find them interesting to write about because I was thinking about how quickly I dispense with adults in my novels usually, and I also think that the teen characters, there's something about teen characters that suits me very well, but I think also suits fiction well generally. I mean, the Bildungsroman is a very old literary genre, and I think it's old because there's something about it that works extremely well. In a way, it's like, you know, I like teen characters. I like having teen readers. It feels very good to me to get letters and emails from teenagers, better than getting letters and emails from adults, I think. I mean, I'm obviously pleased about that too.
You're getting more adult yourself as we speak.
Yes.
So that might be a problem then.
Yeah, I do worry about that. At some point, will I be so old that I don't remember what it's like to be 16 anymore? But on the other hand, there are people who are old, who still write about being 16 pretty well, because I think the emotional experiences tend to be pretty much the same. Like you read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn now, and it's still very funny, and it's still very good. I was at a school yesterday, and some girl asked me, don't you think that you'll stop being funny in a few years when you're older? And I said, well, no, not necessarily. I said, I know many funny people who are older than me. And she said, really? Because this was so unthinkable to her that an old person could be funny. And by old, I'm sure she meant 35 or 30. And but you know, Huck Finn is still funny, and it's quite old by any definition. You know, I mean, I think that Shakespeare is still funny, so you can still be funny even when you're 450. And then, after a horrendous dry spell, I met Catherine XVI on the roof deck of a hotel in Newark, New Jersey during an academic... I'm laughing because this one is entirely true. The others are fictional, but this one is true. And then, after a horrendous dry spell, I met Catherine XVI on the roof deck of a hotel in Newark, New Jersey during an academic decathlon tournament in October of my junior year. And we had about as wild and torrid an affair as you can possibly have over the course of 14 hours at an academic decathlon tournament. And then she dumped me for her boyfriend back home in Kansas. Catherine XVII I met, I'm not going to lie about it, on the internet the next January. And she had a pierced nose with a ring in it, and she had this immensely impressive vocabulary with which she was able to talk about indie rock. One of the words that she used that I didn't initially know the definition of was, in fact, indie. And it was fun to listen to her talk about music, and one time I helped her dye her hair, but then she broke up with me after 3 weeks because I was sort of emo nerd, and she was more looking for emo core. While I generally don't like to use the word heart unless I'm referring to like the blood-pumping, beating organ, there's no question that Catherine the 18th broke my heart because I loved her immensely from the very moment I saw her at a concert that Hassan made me attend during spring break. And I built up my hopes ridiculously and found myself writing her these extravagantly long and painfully philosophical emails, and then she dumped me over email after only 2 actual dates, whereupon I found myself writing her these extravagantly long and painfully pathetic emails. And then just 2 weeks after that, Catherine the 19th showed up at my doorstep. And she was a nice girl with a good heart who liked helping people. And none of them ever lit my heart, God, I can't stop it with that word now, on fire like she did. But I just needed her so much and it never felt like enough. And she wasn't consistent, and her inconsistency and my insecurity were this horrible match for each other. But I still loved her because all of me was wrapped up in all of her because I'd put all my eggs in someone else's basket. And the moral of the story is that you don't remember what happened. You can never remember what happened. What you remember becomes what happened.
How do you make up a book like this? How do you think of a person like your books are character driven? Then you've got to think about the character first because
yeah, I
you
do.
can write a book like that.
I do. I mean, I definitely start with characters. That's where my ideas for the books come from. So with An Abundance of Catherines, I was thinking for a long time about a child prodigy who's sort of past his prime, who's sort of no longer a child, so no longer a child prodigy. And I was also thinking about this character who was a Muslim, but and a religious Muslim, but also very funny and very outgoing and like a normal person. Because when I was growing up, when I was in high school, I was in school with several Muslim kids, and the fact that they were Muslims was not the only defining thing about them. And whereas in most American fiction, whenever there's a Muslim character, the fact that they are a Muslim is the only thing about them. And so I wanted to write those 2 characters. And I knew I wanted to write those 2 characters. I knew I wanted them to be best friends. And this story sort of became the only story that I could tell that had them both in it together from beginning to end. And so I think that's where it came from. With Looking for Alaska, the story is very much driven by Miles and Alaska. And so I knew the character of Alaska and the character of Miles, and the story really developed from there. I mean, I knew what would happen to Alaska from the beginning, but the story developed, I think, from them as people. So instead of getting ideas for books as such, I'd more get ideas for people that I find interesting and think would be interesting to write about, and then the book comes from there.